My name is Sarah, and just a few months ago, I thought I'd be starting an exciting new chapter in my life. After getting into a great university, I found a cozy, affordable apartment close to campus. Moving away from my small hometown felt liberating, and I was ready for a fresh start. But that sense of freedom quickly faded, replaced by something much darker. It started out as little things. I'd notice my neighbor from down the hall, an unassuming man in his 40s, always seeming to be around whenever I left my apartment. At first, I thought it was a coincidence. Maybe he just had a similar schedule. But he'd linger a little too long, his gaze following me down the hall, his smile a little too wide. I tried to ignore it, telling myself I was just being paranoid. A few days later, I found a small, neatly wrapped gift outside my door. Inside was a necklace, simple and elegant, but certainly not something I'd wear. Confused, I left it on my kitchen counter, unsure of who might have left it. Later that day, I received a message from an unknown number. "Did you like the gift?" My stomach dropped. I didn't remember giving my number to anyone in the building. I ignored the message, but that night, I heard footsteps outside my door, the shuffle of shoes pausing just outside, as if listening. The uneasy feeling crept in deeper, and I kept all my lights off, too scared to make a sound. The next day, there was another gift waiting. This time, it was a single, dried-up rose. The petals were crisp, flaking off as I picked it up, sending a wave of dread through me. I knew who had left it. My neighbor's strange behavior, the messages, the footsteps. It was becoming clear he was fixated on me. I decided to confront him the next time I saw him, thinking that perhaps setting firm boundaries would put an end to this strange behavior. When I finally saw him, I tried to be assertive, telling him I didn't appreciate the gifts and wanted to be left alone. His smile faded, but he nodded and mumbled something I couldn't make out before turning back to his apartment. I'd hoped it was over, but I was wrong. That night, my phone buzzed again. "You shouldn't be so rude. You don't understand how much I care." After that, things escalated quickly. Strange, unsettling items began showing up at my door. Animal bones, a scrap of fabric torn from one of my shirts that had mysteriously gone missing from my laundry, and even a photograph of me, taken from a low angle, as if from the stairwell. I was terrified. I reached out to the police, but they were dismissive, saying there was no clear threat. Friends told me to relax, that maybe I was just stressed from moving to a new place, or that maybe he just had a harmless crush. I felt trapped, powerless, as if my pleas for help were invisible. Days turned into weeks, and the surveillance only intensified. I'd catch glimpses of him watching from across the street, or lingering in the parking lot as if waiting for me. At night, the same footsteps would stop outside my door, closer and closer each time. I was too scared to confront him again, terrified of what he might do if I angered him further. I began isolating myself, stopped attending classes, and barely ate or slept. The paranoia was consuming me. I didn't feel safe anywhere. Then came the night that changed everything. It was past midnight, and I was lying in bed, too tense to sleep. I heard the familiar creak of footsteps in the hallway, but this time, they didn't stop. Instead, I heard a quiet scratching sound, followed by a faint click. My blood ran cold as I realized he was picking the lock. Panicked, I scrambled to my feet, frantically searching for anything I could use to defend myself. My hands shook as I clutched my phone, dialing 911 as quietly as I could, praying they'd arrive in time. The door creaked open, and he stepped inside, his eyes wild, his face twisted into a deranged smile. "I knew you'd finally let me in," he whispered, inching toward me with an unsettling calm. There was a sick, possessive look in his eyes, and I knew he wasn't here for any good reason. I backed away, trying to keep space between us, my voice a trembling whisper as I begged him to leave. But he just kept coming, murmuring things I couldn't fully understand, his tone both affectionate and threatening. With the operator still on the line, I threw the phone aside and fought back, shoving past him and running toward the door. He grabbed my arm, yanking me back with a force that sent me stumbling, but I twisted out of his grip, adrenaline kicking in as I screamed at the top of my lungs. I managed to escape into the hallway, where my neighbors had finally come out, startled by the commotion. Just as he lunged after me, the distant sound of police sirens echoed down the street, and he stopped, a look of furious frustration on his face as he realized his time was up. The officers arrived moments later, restraining him as he struggled and screamed, his rage spilling out in incoherent threats. I collapsed against the wall, overwhelmed with relief, but shaking uncontrollably. In the following days, I learned he had a history of stalking and harassing women, and that I wasn't his first victim. The ordeal left a permanent scar on me. Even now, I can't shake the feeling of being watched, as though he left behind a shadow that still clings to my life. Every knock on the door, every creak of the floorboards, every passing stranger fills me with a lingering dread that's impossible to escape. He may be gone, but his presence has left me forever haunted. My name is Lisa, and not too long ago, I moved to a small remote village, hoping to escape the rush of the city. Since I was a kid, I'd always dreamed of living somewhere secluded, and this house in the woods seemed like the perfect place, especially in winter when everything is blanketed in snow and the village is hushed in quiet. For the first few weeks, I enjoyed the peace. In the evenings, I'd take short walks, and the fresh, cold air helped me unwind after work. One evening, as I was heading home, I noticed a car parked nearby. In the darkness, a man sat at the wheel, staring at me intently. I quickly walked by, feeling his eyes follow me. He didn't try to speak, just kept watching until I disappeared inside. The next evening, it happened again, and this time, an uneasy feeling washed over me. I tried to brush it off. Maybe it was a coincidence or some sort of misunderstanding. But this man's gaze was unsettling. And it went on like this nearly every night. He'd park in different spots nearby, sometimes closer, sometimes farther away. But I knew he was watching. Occasionally, he'd disappear for a day or two, only to reappear, making the tension build even more. The snow was falling heavily, and one morning, I noticed footprints around my house. They led to the kitchen window and back to the road, where I found cigarette butts stamped into the snow. My heart sank. I had a gut feeling it was him. That night, I barely slept, straining to hear every sound in the house. At first, I didn't tell anyone. It just seemed too surreal to say out loud, and I didn't want anyone to think I was paranoid. But the anxiety was growing. A few days later, I saw footprints again, this time right on my porch, leading up to my bedroom window. Someone had been standing there, watching me as I slept. I called the police, but they told me there was nothing they could do without clear evidence of a break-in or an attempt to harm me. I tried talking to the neighbors, but they brushed it off as my imagination. No one had seen a suspicious car or noticed anything unusual. Meanwhile, my nights became a tense waiting game. I could no longer sleep soundly, alert to every tiny noise. One evening, when I looked out the window, I saw the car again. This time, it was parked even closer, right near my driveway, and in the headlights, I finally saw his face. He was a man with a cold, hard expression, staring straight at my house. I couldn't ignore it any longer. The next day, I bought a small camera and set it up near the window, hoping it would provide some sense of safety, or at least record something I could show to the police. But when I checked the footage the next day, I found that the camera had been switched off. Someone had come inside and didn't want to be seen. That realization chilled me to the core. Days passed, and my life turned into a constant watch. I only went outside when absolutely necessary, scanning for his car each time. Then, one night, when I peered out the window, there he was again, parked on the same street. My heart froze. He didn't make any moves toward me, just sat in the car, as if he knew that I knew, and that there was nothing I could do. And then, as suddenly as he'd appeared, he vanished. No more cars, no more footprints, no more cigarette butts. But the fear has stayed with me. I still check the windows every night, and every sound makes my heart race. I'm Emily, a graduate student in my early 20s, and last year I moved to a new city for school and work. It was supposed to be the start of something new, a fresh start after years of feeling stuck. I didn't know many people here, so I joined an online dating app, just to see if maybe I could meet someone interesting. That's how I met Nick. At first, he was charming, attentive, witty, and easy to talk to. We had similar interests, and he didn't push for a meetup right away, which I found refreshing. After a few weeks of casual conversations, he asked me out, and I figured, why not? We agreed to meet at a coffee shop in a busy part of town. The first date went smoothly. Nick was exactly as I imagined. He was kind and funny, and there were no strange vibes at all. We talked about everything: books, travel, our shared interest in photography. I went home that night thinking I'd like to see him again. We started dating casually. But a couple of weeks in, something about Nick seemed to change. It was subtle at first, almost like he was trying to test the waters. He'd make offhand comments about where I'd been the day before, which was odd since I hadn't told him. When I asked him about it, he laughed it off, saying he just knew me well enough to guess. It struck me as strange, but I brushed it off as overthinking. Then, one evening, I was out with friends and saw his car parked a block away from the restaurant. I checked my phone to see if I'd missed a message from him, thinking maybe he'd happened to be in the area, but there was nothing. I spent the rest of the night feeling uneasy, noticing his car on my way home. When I asked him about it the next day, he just smiled and said he'd been keeping an eye out to make sure I was safe. That comment hit me hard, and over the next few days, I started feeling like I was being watched more often than not. Whenever I went out, it seemed like he was just around the corner, just passing by. He started texting me, asking why I hadn't told him about my plans with friends, or asking why I wasn't answering his messages immediately. It felt like my life was becoming his business, and he didn't even bother to hide his irritation if I didn't respond fast enough. The change in his tone made me feel trapped, but I was hesitant to cut things off. I wasn't even sure if I was imagining things. The day after I'd decided to take some space, I noticed something outside my apartment. There, on my doorstep, was a small bouquet of flowers. I didn't think much of it, assuming it was a neighbor's delivery mistake. But then I saw the note. In neat, precise handwriting, it read, "I always know where you are." My stomach dropped. I couldn't believe he would go this far, but who else could it be? I called Nick, confronting him, but he denied everything, laughing it off as some weird coincidence. The denial only added to my fear, like he was playing a game where he'd always be one step ahead. That night, I started checking my windows, making sure all my locks were secure. The feeling of someone watching me intensified, and I couldn't shake the thought that he was somewhere close. Days passed, and his texts got worse. They went from "good morning" to "why are you ignoring me?" and "I saw you left work early. Where were you?" I had never told him where I worked. It was a job I'd picked up after our first date. I felt sick. I decided to go to the police, but with nothing concrete, they couldn't do much. They suggested I block him and file a report, but I was scared of what he might do if I cut him off completely. The next week, I started noticing cigarette butts near my apartment building, exactly by my bedroom window. I knew he didn't smoke, but it was like he'd taken up the habit just to stand out there at night. Sometimes I'd catch glimpses of a silhouette from my window, a figure in the shadows that would disappear the second I'd look closer. I was losing sleep, and every knock on my door sent a shock through my body. One evening, after another long, restless day, I checked my phone and saw dozens of missed calls from him. The messages were frantic, angry, like he was completely unraveling. "You can't just ignore me, Emily. You think I won't find you? I know your schedule better than you do. Chilled, I knew I had to get help. I called a friend and asked her to come over, explaining everything as quickly as I could. She insisted I stay with her for the night, but before I left, I decided to check my windows and door one last time. That's when I saw his car, parked across the street. And then, I saw him get out, looking up, watching. I froze. The horror of realizing that he'd been planning this, following me, knowing every detail of my life, hit me with full force. I grabbed my things and ran out the back exit, meeting my friend down the block. We drove straight to the police station, where I filed another report. This time, with the text messages and a description of his recent behavior, they took me seriously. I never saw Nick after that night. He disappeared from my life as quickly as he'd entered it, leaving me with lingering fears that sometimes keep me up at night. But not long after, the police informed me that when they searched his apartment, they found walls lined with photos of me, carefully taken from a distance, and piles of notes detailing every part of my life. He'd kept meticulous records of my routines, when I left for work, the places I frequented, even details as small as the brand of coffee I drank. He'd been studying me, tracking my every move like I was some kind of puzzle he was trying to piece together. I moved to a new apartment with better security, and I avoid dating apps entirely now. To this day, I don't go anywhere without feeling like someone's eyes are on me, like his shadow is waiting for a chance to reappear.